It's 4 p.m. on Thursday, September 18th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. We begin with the government's announcement to set the tariff rate for imported rice. This comes not long after the country's farmers protested the government's decision to open up the rice market starting next year. Myung-kil has our top story.
The Korean government has set its tariff on rice imports at 513%. The Agriculture Ministry said the high tariff will help protect Korea's rice industry as imported rice will be more expensive.
We have prepared measures such as stabilizing the income of rice farmers, modernizing the rice farming industry, and promoting the consumption of rice.
Lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party also said imposing high tariffs was the only answer to help locally produced rice compete with the influx of imported rice on the market. The move comes as the country is set to liberalize its rice market from next year. However, farmers and civic groups oppose the move, saying it will hurt their livelihoods and the local rice market.
The government unilaterally declared a tariff rate without even discussing it with the farmers or the public. The whole process was done in secret.
The ministry said the proposed tariff rate will be submitted to the World Trade Organization before the end of this month. If the rate is confirmed by the WTO, the proposed tariff will go into effect on January 1st of 2015. However, it could be months until the process is finalized, while the WTO assesses whether the tariff rate proposed by Korea is appropriate. Korea had been allowed to delay the opening of its rice market under a WTO quota agreement in 1993, in exchange for gradually increasing its mandatory import quota, which reached more than 400,000 tons this year. The agreement with the WTO requires Korea to continue importing the mandatory quota even after the market is opened next year at a 5% tariff rate. The government could not afford to further postpone the opening of the rice market, nor had a reason to do so, as the country's rice consumption continues to drop. Myung-kil, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the Finance Ministry has laid out its budget plan for next year. The spending is raised by the largest amount since the global financial crisis in 2008. Ministry officials say their expansionary policies are necessary to pull the economy out of a low-growth trap. Our economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
The Korean government on Thursday unveiled its biggest spending increase in 7 years for 2015, underlining its determination to get the nation's economy back on a normal growth track. In its new budget proposal, the Finance Ministry said it will raise spending by 5.7% from this year to 376 trillion won, or roughly $360 billion US dollars.
We raised spending by about $7.5 billion from our original plan. That's a massive rise considering the government's additional spending plans usually hovered around the $5 to $6 billion level in the past.
More than 30% of the 2015 budget will be spent on creating more jobs and improving welfare. It also calls for increasing expenditures in safety-related government projects like an overall inspection of safety facilities. The government aims to prevent large-scale accidents and disasters like April's ferry sinking from happening again. The proposal calls for a $32 billion budget deficit, which would represent 2.1% of the nation's GDP. But the ministry says by breathing fresh life into the sputtering economic recovery, the country would achieve fiscal balance within a few years.
The increased expenditure will result in a virtuous cycle, as it will lead to more income and robust business activities that will, in turn, generate greater tax revenues.
Korea's debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to inch up next year from this year, but the government says it still reflects Korea's relatively sound fiscal health. It says the mid-30% range is still much lower than the OECD average of around 110%. The increased spending plan is projected to help the economy grow by 4% next year. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Senior officials from Korea and Japan will meet in Tokyo on Friday to resume talks on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. Now, this is the fourth meeting of its kind and comes just days after Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se held private talks with Japan's ambassador to Korea for the first time, raising hopes about a possible thawing of their current frosty ties. It also comes amid rumors of a summit between President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on the sidelines of the APEC summit in November. President Park has not sat down for a one-on-one with Abe since taking office early last year due to ongoing tensions surrounding historical and territorial matters. And there was also a report that Seoul and Tokyo had discussed a visit by President Park to Japan on her way back to Korea from the UN General Assembly next week. But presidential spokesperson Min Kyung-wook dismissed the report outright, saying the two countries had not talked about a summit. He added that the possibility was never even considered. Citing an unnamed source, local broadcaster MBC said the two sides discussed the matter early last month, but that talks were later called off after Seoul determined that Tokyo's position on historical issues was not satisfactory. The U.S. envoy on North Korean human rights is urging Pyongyang to free 3 American detainees held in the country if it wants to spur international tourism. In a column published in the Washington Post on Wednesday, Robert King said releasing the U.S. citizens would be the first step to reducing the risk of traveling to North Korea. He said there is little doubt that Americans are being used by the North for propaganda purposes to encourage the U.S. to send a high-level official. Now, Victor Cha, the Korea chair for Washington-based think tank CSIS, meanwhile says the U.S. government should impose a travel ban on North Korea until the detainees are freed. In the meantime, the U.S. has expressed its reservations about a plan that would relocate all U.S. forces to the city of Pyeongtaek by 2016. Citing multiple diplomatic sources, Yonhap News reports that Washington stressed the need to keep a brigade division at a military base north of the Hangang River. Its reasoning is that the brigade, which is in charge of countering long-range rockets and missiles from North Korea during wartime, will not be capable of adequately carrying out missions if it is transferred to Pyeongtaek, which is about 70 kilometers south of Seoul. An official at South Korea's Defense Ministry, however, said relocation plans for all U.S. bases remain unchanged. Hyundai Motor Group has won a bid to acquire real estate in the affluent district of Gangnam in Seoul. Now, Hyundai's final offer came in at $10 billion, 3 times the appraised value of the site, and outbid Samsung Electronics. The estate is nearly 80,000 square meters in size and is one of the last remaining large plots of land available for development in the capital. It currently houses the headquarters of the state-run Korea Electric Power Corporation, which is relocating to Jeollanam-do province. Hyundai Motor says it plans to build a global business center on the site. Now, on today's announcement, shares of Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Motors fell 9% and 10% respectively, while KEPCO's grew at 7%. Chinese investors remained active on the Korean bourse for the 8th consecutive month last month. The Financial Supervisory Service says Chinese investors now account for a quarter of the total shares purchased by foreign investors this year at $2 billion. Among major foreign investors from countries like the U.S., the UK, Germany, and Japan, China has been the only one to remain bullish on Seoul shares since the start of this year. Market analysts say Chinese investors are bringing their money here because of the slowing growth rate in China and the decline in profitability of American bonds. And it's not just the wars where Korea is seeing more Chinese input. Korea has become one of the most visited countries by Chinese tourists, and with China's National Day holiday just around the corner, a record number of visitors are expected to fly across the West Sea. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
China's week-long National Day holiday kicks off on October 1st this year. Around 160,000 Chinese tourists are expected to flock to Seoul, up 35% from the same period a year ago. Then exactly how many Chinese tourists come to Korea? Nearly 8 million foreign tourists have visited the country this year as of July. Of them, around 3.4 million were Chinese visitors, meaning 4 in every 10 foreign tourists were Chinese. And it's a trend that's likely to continue. The total number of Chinese visitors is expected to reach 5 million next month and 6 million by the end of the year. Korea's tourism industry is getting a nice boost from the surge. Chinese people are much wealthier than they used to be, with their gross national income per capita standing at around $6,700. And they aren't shy about spending while they're here either. Data shows Chinese visitors were the biggest tourist spenders in 2013, with individuals shelling out about $2,300 on average, up 80% from 2008. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG NEWS.
In tech news, the world's two biggest tech giants, Samsung and Apple, are busy releasing their newest gadgets. The phablets and handsets will come with upgraded performances, and apparently it's not just tech enthusiasts who are jumping for joy. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
Pre-orders for the Galaxy Note 4 began on Thursday in Korea. The newest phablet from Samsung comes with a 64-bit application processor, the first to run on the Android-based operating system, which means it will process data 2 times faster than current models that are equipped with 32-bit processors. And much like a car engine that has a higher engine displacement, this means the 64-bit Galaxy Note 4 requires more space for random access memory, making higher quality memory chips a necessity. That's got Korea's semiconductor industry excited. Industry trackers predict a 25% boost or more in memory chips as more companies release 64-bit smartphones, particularly those that require 4 to 8 GB of RAMs. The gaming industry also stands to benefit since the 64-bit smartphone will have higher definition. Gamers will enjoy a better experience when using their smartphones, which will narrow the gap between PC and smartphone gaming. Apple's iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, which is expected to be released in Korea between October and November, is also equipped with a 64-bit application processor. Google is expected to unveil its 64-bit smartphone sometime this fall. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has vowed to keep interest rates near zero for a considerable time, arguing that the economy is expanding at a moderate pace. Chairwoman Janet Yellen says the country's inflation rate was running below the policy committee's 2% objective and that there were still too many Americans out there who want jobs but cannot find them. Also, the Fed decided to stay on course on the tapering of its monthly bond buying program until it comes to an end in October, saying it will cut an additional $10 billion starting next month.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
Voting in Scotland has begun in an historic poll that will determine the fate of Scotland's union with the United Kingdom. The latest polls leading up to the election day are too close to call. Shin Se-min reports.
For what could be one of the most important decisions of their lives, it comes down to the simplest of choices: yes or no. Polls have opened across Scotland for some 4 million eligible voters who will decide on whether their country serves its 307-year union with the United Kingdom.
Yes, I'm happy with the decisions on that very well. And I'll go all the way. And if we get it tomorrow, I'll be a very happy man.
Definitely no, no, no. Because we are better as a team. A team always works better than an individual.
The latest poll released Wednesday showed a paper-thin lead for the No campaign at 51 to 49%, but it's far too close to call. The survey also showed as many as 600,000 Scots are still undecided about which way they'll vote.
I am still undecided. It's worrying, but it's such a huge decision to make, and we all need to take our vote very, very seriously, so I still really don't know what I'm going to do.
If Scotland decides to secede from Great Britain, there are a lot of unknowns. Will the newly independent country still have a future with the European Union? And there'll also be a critical decision to take on its currency. They'll also only have 18 months to arrange all the logistics. But if Scotland chooses to stay within the UK, the relations with the country will most likely be different, as British Prime Minister David Cameron has said London will grant Scotland more powers to govern itself. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. House of Representatives has passed President Barack Obama's plans to help Syrian rebels fight off Islamic State militants. This, as State Secretary John Kerry says, the needed international coalition is growing. Park Ji-won has this report.
Despite reservations, the U.S. House of Representatives signed off on President Barack Obama's plans to arm and train Syrian rebel forces for their fight against Islamic State militants. The Senate votes next and is widely expected to approve the bill.
I want to start off by saying thank you to House members, Republican and Democrat, who came together today to pass an important component on our strategy for dealing with this terrible terrorist organization.
It's the latest step in the U.S. plan to degrade and destroy the IS militant group. Appearing in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the international community was coming together to counter the threat. He said more than 50 countries have already pledged their support, and that more were expected to follow at the UN General Assembly next week.
I'm confident that with our strategy in place and our international partners by our side, we will have all that we need. And with the help of the Congress, we will be able to succeed in degrading and ultimately destroying this monstrous organization wherever it exists.
The strategy will apparently not include U.S. ground troops, something that President Obama repeated during a visit to the U.S. Central Command on Wednesday.
But I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight for their own country against these terrorists.
Obama emphasized that the U.S. would maintain a supporting role, saying it's the best way to secure peace in the region amid the brutality of the extremist group. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Thank you, sir.
This year's Asian Games, hosted by Korea's western port city of Incheon, will hold its grand opening ceremony tomorrow. Now, Korea's history with the regional sporting event dates back 60 years, and over that time, Team Korea has proven itself as a fierce competitor. Our Kwon So-ah gives us a brief history of Korea's place in the Asian Games.
Asia's biggest sporting event, the Asian Games, finally gets started on Friday in Korea's northwestern port city of Incheon. The history of the Asian Games dates back to 1951, when it was first hosted in New Delhi. 35 years later, the event came to South Korea for the first time when it was hosted by Seoul, followed by Busan in 2002. Incheon now becomes the third Korean city to have the honors. South Korea first participated in the Asian Games in 1954 in Manila, when it placed third in the overall medal count and has sent athletes to every event since.
In 1970, in Bangkok, Korean swimmer Cho Ho-ryun began his rise to legendary status, winning gold in the 400 and 1500-meter freestyles. At the 8th Games in Bangkok, Korea's Kim Jin-ho won gold in archery, while Yang Jung-mo came out on top in wrestling. In 1981, Korea started preparing to host the 10th Asian Games in Seoul. Stadiums, accommodations, and new roads were built leading up to the event in 1986.
30억 아시아인이 공동의 번영과 우위를 약속하면서 아시아의 영원한 전진을 다짐한 아시아인의 축제가 열린 것입니다.
Team Korea thrived that year, breaking various world records and finishing second overall. Korea showed its superiority in male and female hockey, defeated China in table tennis, and swept up medals in all 12 weight classes of boxing.
성화가 꺼졌습니다. 우리는 해냈습니다.
Korea has grown into a powerful sports nation throughout the years and aims to prove it once again at the 2014 Incheon Asian Games, where the goal is to win at least 90 gold medals. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
And in arts news, traditional Korean dance has been developing for hundreds of years, taking on different styles and forms along the way. Our Im Hyun-hee takes us to a new collaboration where the traditional complements the contemporary quite nicely.
It's the classic dispute of men versus women. But this time, there's a twist. This chaotic battlefield is also where the West meets the East, where the fiery red comes in contact with the cool blue. It's a battle of two worlds. These 16 warriors are from the Middle-earth kingdom of Silmarillion, charged with the duty of guarding the heaven they call Pablophores. They must prevent the ferocious Caillou and his human soldiers from entering the only passage into the world of gods.
One by one, as they dance, they die and fall off the stage. And at the end, only the queen from the chess team and a soldier from the Changi team remain. I choreographed the male team and modernized Korean traditional dance techniques, whereas An Song-soo did a very good job creating a contemporary sensitive dance for the women. So when we come together, we clash.
The performance was choreographed by the National Dance Company of Korea with the intent of transforming traditional Korean dance to make it more accessible to the younger generations, all the while empowering contemporary dance. But the clash goes further. Paganini's soothing music plays against the rhythmic beating of Korean percussions. And there's strength in numbers, but there's also the willpower of an individual. The competition is steep between the groups, but with every swing and every step, there's harmony to be found amidst the turmoil.
The men ultimately want to reach the God side. They follow the style of traditional Korean dance with influences of martial arts, so the movements are very sharp and precise, allowing them to control the scene when on stage. And when they transition with the woman, the scene is very colorful.
Men are physically stronger than women, so as the queen, if I want to win, I have to find my inner strength and rhythm in order to bring my body forward to make a presence on the stage.
It's a place where humans yearn to be gods, but are barred from the entrance, stuck in a Middle-earth. A place where fantasy can come alive, stimulating the senses, all because of the movements and actions of these dancers. Im Hyun-hee, ARIRANG News.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. Unlike yesterday, we've had a bright day here in Seoul, but as you can see, we have a blanket of clouds moving easterly direction across the nation. Meanwhile, the rain clouds that are passing over in Jeju Island should clear up later this evening. Now, the regions where the sun was shining saw daytime highs that were a few degrees higher than yesterday. And because we are still having the temperatures in the near 30s, we are expecting the leaves to start changing colors up to 4 days later this year than the previous months. Now, going over to our temperature readings. Seoul will peak at 27 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will see the highs of 26 and 25 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island and Dokdo will get up slightly low at 23 degrees, while Myung-kil is also in the mid-20s at 24. Well, that's all for Korea. Now here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that does it for this edition of our newscast. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more at 6 p.m. Korea time.